Many people consider the devil to be just a story you tell little kids so that they don't do wrong, they don't disobey their parents. But in reality, the devil is a very real being. He's a person, he's a real reality. And we know this from the scriptures. Many times our Lord spoke about the existence of the devil. The devil tempted him in the desert and whatnot. But many people also lose sight of the true nature of the devil. He's not a fairy that flies around tempting little kids. He is a very, very powerful spirit. His intelligence is of an order much greater than ours. He was one of the most powerful angels that God ever created, and every angel is far superior to any human being. So I know this is a little bit of repetition, I'm kind of preaching to the choir, but I just want to go through the beginning story of creation of how the devil came into being. And we're going to talk a little bit about his attributes after that. You all know that God, before he created human beings, before he created the earth, he created the angels. All of the angels were perfect. They had a profound intelligence. They're pure spirit. They don't have bodies. They're much more similar to God than people are. And God, at a certain point, started to unfold to the angels his plans for all of creation. He told them that he was going to create the world. He told them that he was going to put man in a state of trial. He told them all of these things. And at a certain point, one of the greatest angels, we don't know if he was the greatest, he was certainly one of the highest, an angel that was so great he was called Lucifer. Lucifer means the bearer of light. He was the one that was so brilliant, he carried light with him. He started to get upset about God's plans for creation. It's not certain what he got upset about, but it seems most likely that what started to get Lucifer upset was when God started speaking to him and telling him that he was going to create a human being named our Lord Jesus Christ, and that he himself, God, was going to incarnate as a man. And that the angels would have to adore this man as being God. That right there, Lucifer had a problem with. Why? Because he realized how superior he was to man. And the idea of him bowing before God in a human form was something he didn't like. Now, when that went a step further, and God revealed to Lucifer that he would be born of a human woman who was not God, and who still would be greater than him, who would be the queen of the angels, and he would have to bow down in veneration to her, that's when he revolted. That was too much for him to take. And he screamed out, non serviam, which means, I will not serve. I will not serve. Any sin that we commit in life, we are repeating the words of Satan, I will not serve, because you're not serving the moral law that God instituted for all of us. So Satan screamed, I will not serve. And when he did so, a third of the angels took his part. They gathered around him. Now when that happened, one of the angels, St. Michael the Archangel, screamed out, Quisud Deus, which is Latin, which means, who is like unto God? What does that mean? It means, who dares to argue with God's plan? God is all-powerful, all-knowing, he is everything. And there was a great battle in heaven when this took place. Now, we don't really know how it is that angels fight each other. But however it is, it must be a fight of ideas, a fight of wills. There's no body, there's no corporeal form. They can't hit each other. They can't stab each other. They can't shoot each other. But there was this great war that took place in heaven between the angels that wanted to serve God and the angels that wanted to revolt against God. The good angels were victorious, and they cast the bad angels into hell. We all know this story. One thing that's interesting about this story is that everybody knows this story very well. What a lot of people don't realize is 2/3 of the bad angels, 2/3 of them, did not entirely take the devil's part. 2/3 of the ones that actually revolted against God took a middle ground. They didn't engage in the fight. They wanted to see how things would turn out. And because of that, God did not send them directly to hell. 2/3 of the devils are called the devils of the air. the devils of the air, and they're not confined to hell. They roam about the earth. They go between the planets. They're very active in our lives. Their role is not primarily to tempt man into sin. Their role is more to create the conditions for sin. So, for example, if somebody doesn't like someone else, the devils of the air will make them more frustrated, more angry with them. They'll bring their passions, their emotions to a crescendo, and then the devils of hell come in, and they're the ones that tempt the person to sin. They're the ones that will come in and say, okay, you're angry with him, it's time for you to kill that man. So it's just a little side note. Many people don't realize that there are these two demonic actions, and if you think about your lives, you think about how temptation comes upon you. Many times before the fall, there were conditions that were created within you that made you more likely to fall. That's the double action of the devils. You have the devils of the air and the devils of hell. Anyway, let's move on a little bit. So that's the story. That's how the devil came into being. What do we know about the mentality, the psychology of the devil? First of all, we know that he is a psychopath. He's crazy. Why is he crazy? Because he put himself to fight against an all-powerful God. He knows he's going to lose. He knows that everything he does is going continues to do against God is going to give him a deeper place in hell. It's going to bring more suffering on him. But he does it anyway. It's a psychotic mentality. We also know two attributes of the devil that our Lord told us about. We know that he's a liar and a murderer. If you looked at the scripture, St. John chapter 8, verse 44, it says this, "You are of the our Lord is talking to the Pharisees. He said, you are of the father, the devil. You are of your father, the devil, and the desires of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and he stood not in truth, because truth is not in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of lies." So, these are two traits of the devil we know for sure that are very, very common amongst him. When you look around, when you see lies and when you see homicide, you see murder, you know the devil is present there. What does that say about our world today? Let's talk about lies first. Are there a lot of lies in our society today? Look from the highest positions. Look at our politicians. Look at our media. Look at our scientists. Look at global warming. Our whole society is built upon lies. Many, many lies. Now remember, when lies and murder are rampant, you know the devil's there. What about murder? Look at the 20th century. Look at the Nazis, the communists. Look at abortion. I'm not going to belabor this point too much because we all know this. Look at the martyrdoms that take place in our world. Many people don't realize this. The 20th century had more martyrs for the Catholic faith than all other 19 centuries of church history put together. So you start in the year 33 when our Lord died on the cross. Count up all the murders from the year 33 to the year 1900. All the Roman persecutions, all the persecutions of Protestantism. There were more martyrs in the 20th century than all of those martyrs put together. So we see, and again, I'm not going to belabor this, we all know this, lies and murder are more rampant in our days than they have been possibly since the beginning of the world. Certainly since the rise of Christian civilization. So what can we say? We can say very clearly we live in the era of the devil. Our modern world is the world of the devil. Leo XIII recognized this very clearly. He lived in the late 1800s. He was Pope. And in order to combat this, he recognized the influence of the devil in the world. He wrote 2 exorcisms. One of them was a long exorcism that's to be used in the actual church procedure, the practice of exorcism. The other one is a short exorcism that he wanted all the faithful to pray. You all know it. It's the St. Michael prayer. And Leo XIII mandated that after every low Mass, the short exorcism would be prayed. Unfortunately, we see that we don't pray the short exorcism after church anymore. It's very, very rare to find a church, a Mass, that ends with the St. Michael prayer. They do exist. I know several parishes in California where they say that. But the widespread loss, the widespread breaking of that practice was certainly a victory of the devil. Incidentally, both Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI called out for priests to start praying the exorcism at the end of Mass again. It hasn't been done. So, getting back to this notion of a whole world dominated by the devil, the great theologian, the French theologian, Father Léon Christiani, wrote an impressive book called Evidence of Satan in the Modern World. And in it, he theorized about the idea of the whole world in our day being possessed. A possession of the world. Obviously, that's different than the possession of an individual. But if you think of an individual, the devil being inside and controlling all the actions that are done, you see, there's a lot of weight to what he said. A lot of weight to what he said. Interestingly enough, there was a great mystic of the late 1800s, early 1900s, named Blessed Francisco Palau. And he wrote a lot about the crisis, the moral crisis of our days. He said the exact same thing. He said that the world is possessed, and he went even further. He said, when Our Lady again triumphs over evil, when the reign of Mary comes, which Our Lady spoke about at Fatima, which St. Louis de Montfort spoke about so much, he said the world would have to undergo an exorcism, the whole world. He went even as far as to describe that as a possessed person convulses when they're being exorcised, he said the whole world would shake and convulse with earthquakes and things of that nature. Obviously, he was a mystic. We don't know exactly how that will apply, but that's that notion. And we need to live under that notion, understanding that the devil is extremely present in our world. Well, the devil's mind, and this psychotic mind he has that we're talking about, his aim is to do as much harm to God as he can. How does he go about doing that? He can't bring the angels down. He can't do anything directly about God, against God. He can't bring the angels down to hell with him. So what does he do? He centers himself on men. Because right now, we are the changeable element. We're the only ones that can provide a victory of the devil over God. What are the angels doing while the devil's trying to bring as many souls to hell? They're fighting against it. So the human world, we are all the center of a tremendous fight between the angels and the devils that's continuously going on. We're the ones that can gain glory for God. We're the ones that can give Satan an apparent victory over God. We're the center of all of this. So the devil, in his tremendous intelligence, has devised different means to influence man, to get involved in man's life. Now, there's many different classifications they have of the different ways that the devil influences man. I'm only going to talk about 3 of them because they're the 3 broadest categories. Just to make it simple, we're going to talk about temptation, obsession, and possession. Temptation, obsession, and possession. These are the 3 main ways that the devil influences man. If you get into it, the study of demonology, you see there are many other categories. There's oppression, there's this and that, but all of them fit into these 3 basic categories. So let's talk a little bit about temptation first of all. We all know what temptation is. We all experience it every single day. Now, dealing with temptation is very important to recognize one thing. Not all temptations come from the devil. We can't be creating things from the devil all the time. If you're really, really hungry and you're walking through a field and you see a field of beautiful grapes and you're starving to death, the devil doesn't have to get involved for you to want to go and steal some of that man's grapes to eat them. That can come from our fallen nature. If somebody loves flowers and they see a beautiful flower in somebody's lawn that they want, the devil doesn't have to get involved to tempt them to take that flower. It's something that they naturally, our fallen nature forces us, doesn't force us, but inclines us to do that. That being said, it's very important to realize that many temptations do come from the devil. The devil can be the origin of temptation. And we know that again from the scriptures. St. Paul in his letter to the Ephesians said, you all know this very well, Put you on the armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the deceits of the devil. For our fighting is not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and powers. Those are angels, fallen angels. Against the rulers of this world of darkness, against the spirits of wickedness in high places. So, like I said, the devil very much can incite temptation. As Charles Baudelaire said, one of the devil's greatest victories was to convince the world that he doesn't exist. We have to recognize his action. There's another thing to remember. The devil is very active even when we are tempted by our own fallen nature. Because the second that person sees those grapes and he's hungry, the devil is going to get involved and try to push him to commit that sin. So even though all temptation doesn't originate with the devil, he's very actively involved whenever we are tempted. Now what I just said there is a little bit controversial theologically. They argue back and forth whether the devil always gets involved or not. The most likely school of thought says that yes, he does get involved. And why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he? In his intelligence, he wants to hit us when we're weakest, when we're already experiencing that temptation. So like I said, that's temptation. We're all very, very familiar with this. It's an outside force that inclines us to do that which we should not do. Let's talk a little bit about the second category, obsession. Obsession is similar to temptation in that obsession comes from outside. Excuse me. But obsession is much more intense than temptation. It can consist in many different phenomena. But in order to be classified as obsession, the presence of the devil has to be absolutely clear. It has to be something that goes on the natural forms of temptation. This can take the form of preternatural occurrences. Objects flying across the room, people being thrown across the room. It's actually very interesting because almost all cases of possession start with a profound demonic obsession. Now remember, again, obsession, we're talking about outside, influences outside the body. I'm very familiar with the actual case that gave rise to the book and the movie, The Exorcist. I'm sure you're all very familiar with that. I do not suggest that you watch the movie The Exorcist, because it's full of blasphemies and things, but that actually was based on a true story. And the true story was not a little girl that was possessed, it was a young man, it was a young boy, 12 or 13 years old. And the bulk of that exorcism took place in St. Louis. And it's very interesting, I mention this right now, we're going to return to this case a couple times throughout this talk, but I mention it now because that's a classical case of how a case of possession starts with a case of obsession. Because before the boy, the devil actually entered into the boy, the family started seeing very strange things. The boy would be sitting in a chair and it would bend all the way down and come back up straight again. In his room at night, the furniture would move around the room, the doors on the dresser would open and close. These are all typical of demonic obsession. It's actually very interesting because you read the case, you read it clearly. When all of these strange things started happening, it was actually in Maryland. The boy hadn't moved to St. Louis yet. And the family was a Lutheran family. So they contacted their Lutheran minister and they said, something strange is going on with our son. So the Lutheran minister came over and went up into his room and he saw all these strange things happening. He saw the furniture moving. He saw the bed shaking. And he called the parents aside and he said, look, he said, Robbie, that's what the name they gave. They covered his identity. He said, this boy, he said, has a very active imagination. He's 12, 13 years old. He's got the room rigged up. He's got fishing lines that you don't see. He's playing a prank on you. He said, I tell you what, let Robbie stay at my house tonight where he doesn't have everything rigged up. And he'll see that the game's up. He'll see you found him out and everything will be over. So the family said, fine. So they let the boy go home with the Lutheran minister. 3 o'clock in the morning, the ministers started pounding on their door of their house. They woke up and they came down and the minister said, look, he said, you need to take this boy to see a Catholic priest because Catholics understand these things and we don't. They had the same experience when they went to St. Louis. They tried to get another Protestant active. Exact same thing happened. Just a little side note. So these are all cases of obsession. This can also consist of beatings, starting fires. Many times very holy men will suffer demonic obsession. Perfect example of that is St. John Vianney, the Curé of Ars. Many times he was beaten by the devil. The devil would start his bed on fire when he was sleeping. He would punch him, he would throw him across the room. I've been to Ars, I've seen his room. The whole floor is covered with scorch marks from what the devil used to do. This is demonic obsession. Obsession can also consist in internal things. For example, obsessive thoughts. Now, you have to be very careful there because there are several types of mental illness that can provoke obsessive thoughts. But there is a type of obsessive thought that is provoked by the devil and is a case of obsession. It consists normally in a very strong idea that enters into the mind that doesn't have any other explanation, and the person can't get it out. These are different aspects of obsession. Well, that brings us to the idea of demonic possession. We've all heard of demonic possession. Many people doubt its existence, but in fact, we know as a fact, for a fact, that possession does exist. Again, it's in the Scriptures. Many times our Lord cast devils out of people. Even more than that, our Lord told us, "In my name shall you cast out devils." It's in the Bible. Now, our Lord wouldn't be telling us to cast devils out if it weren't possible for a devil to gain possession of a person or of an animal or of a thing. So we know it exists. Now, the difference between possession and obsession is once possession takes place, the devil is operating from within the body of the person, not from outside. He's able to take complete control over the body of the person. It's important to remember he can possess the body, but he cannot possess the soul. So a possessed person is not themselves acting out. It's not their soul. Many times they even lose consciousness when they go into their fits and whatnot. The devil can possess a body and not a soul. Only God has access to the soul of man. And that answers another question: why does the devil possess people? I think one of the reasons is he's trying to create a mockery of what grace does to a soul. He wants to give the impression that he's inside the soul of the person, but he's not. So, we've all seen the Hollywoodian representations of possession. I've heard a lot of different conferences on possession, on exorcism, and normally the person who's giving the lecture comes out and says, "That's all Hollywoodian, it's really not like that." Well, I'm going to tell you, I've read countless cases of possession, and it really is like that. It really is like that. It's something terrifying. I've read cases of levitation, people walking on the ceiling. I'm sorry to get very prosaic, but vomiting up foul things in quantities that are bigger than the volume of the body of the possessed person. Superhuman strength, growling, screaming, blasphemy, speaking in different languages. And, you know, it's not just what I've read. I've actually heard tapes of a real exorcism, audio tapes. I was offered to see a video once. I didn't want to see it, so I didn't watch it, but I have heard the audio tapes. It was a case in Brazil. It was a priest who was very friendly with the TFP, was performing the exorcism. And I'm telling you, the sounds that were coming out of this boy were not human. They were way beyond that, way beyond that. Now, superhuman strength, like I said, is another example. Something that would give you more of an idea of the type of things that possessed people will do. In the St. Louis case, I mentioned he started in Maryland. When he was in Maryland, this young boy, after the Lutheran minister told them to look for a priest, they did so. And they found a priest. And the priest wasn't very well prepared for the exorcism, but he tried to perform it anyway. He didn't prepare himself properly. He didn't understand the ritual very well. Well, as soon as the possession, the exorcism started, the boy lay there very quietly on the bed, and he reached down with his hand and pulled a spring out of the box spring and slashed the priest from his wrist to his chest. Took hundreds of stitches to close it up. It was so deep, the wound, that for the rest of his life, that priest was not able to use that arm. 20 years later, they saw him saying Mass, and at the elevation, he could only elevate the host with one arm. That's the type of supernatural strength, the strange things that go on. Just to give you the impression, again, I want you to realize that those horrible things you see in Hollywood may be a little dramatized, but they are real. Once in St. Louis, the exorcism, the bulk of the exorcism, took place at Alexian Brothers Hospital. It was a Catholic hospital run by Alexian Brother monks. And the bulk of the exorcism took place in the mental ward of that hospital, so that the screaming and all of these things wouldn't cause alarm. They were trying to keep it hidden. So it was in a padded cell in the psych ward. And one of the monks who worked his whole life in the mental ward, you can imagine the types of things that this monk saw. The craziest people you can imagine going into fits. 15 years after the end of the exorcism, he was with some other monks, and they were listening to the radio. And an advertisement came on for Woody Woodpecker. You all remember Woody Woodpecker, don't you? Remember the way he'd laugh? That woodpecker started laughing like that. This monk, again, his whole life in the psych ward, became so outside of himself, he started to tremble, and he jumped and pulled the plug out of the radio. It took him 15 minutes to compose himself before he could speak. And he said, "I'm sorry," he said, "but I took part in that exorcism. And the laughter of the devil during that exorcism was so shocking to me." Now remember, this is a man who worked his whole life in a psych ward. It was so shocking, I can't control myself when I hear that type of laughter anymore. That's how serious this is. So, what are the signs of possession? It goes without saying that the church is very careful before they identify something as a true case of possession. It doesn't rush into things. Many types of mental illness can appear to be possession. So, the church has always been extremely careful with these things. It's like the church used to be with canonization. People don't understand the rigor of canonization, how serious it was. Just a little side story to demonstrate that. Pope Pius XII, before he was Pope, was the prefect of the Congregation for the Canonization of Saints. And he had a friend who was a Protestant. He was walking with this Protestant once, and he had a folder in his hand. He pulled it out, and he gave the Protestant a sheet of paper, and he said, "Take a look at this miracle, and tell me what you think about it." Because 3 miracles used to be obligatory for the canonization of a saint. So the Protestant took it up and he read through it and he said, "My gosh," he said, "if all Catholic miracles were this well documented, I'd become a Catholic." And the future Pope Pius XII took it back and said, "Really?" He said, "I just threw this out for lack of evidence," and put it back in his folder, and they kept walking. That's how serious the church takes these things. So I'm going to read to you a list of different signs, and the church will not even consider a case of possession to be true possession unless multiple of these signs are present. And when the church rules on something like this, it's very serious. First one, extreme agitation. Second, blasphemy. Third, horror for holy things. Now, in order for this to be a true sign, the reaction of the possessed person has to be instantaneous, and they can't have known that the holy object was brought into the room. So for example, if you go into a room and you say, "This is holy water," and you start spraying it, and the person starts screaming, that doesn't count as a sign in the eyes of the church. If you have a relic in your pocket that the possessed person doesn't know about, and when you walk in the room he immediately starts shrieking, that's a sign of possession. 4, superhuman strength that goes beyond adrenaline rushes. 5, signs that violate the laws of nature, like levitation, flying, walking on the ceiling. 6, speaking in and or understanding languages that the person has never been exposed to. The church is very serious again. If that person has ever been exposed to the language, not even learned it, but been exposed to it, the church doesn't count it. I know a priest who, in California, who experienced this. He was talking to somebody, a person was brought to him with they thought it was some type of mental problem. They wanted him to counsel the person. and Father Bishop was speaking to him, and just out of the blue started saying in a conversational tone some of the prayers of exorcism in Latin. And the person started going nuts. They understood the prayer exactly. This person had never been exposed to Latin. That's a sign of possession. Another sign, knowledge of hidden things or places that the person has no way of knowing. If somebody walks in and he says, you know, in your living room next to the sofa, there's this and that, that's a sign of possession. Another one is knowledge of the sins of those in the room. Once again, these are some of the signs. Only multiple signs are necessary for the church to give authorization for an official exorcism. In order to prepare yourself for an exorcism because of these powers of the devil, the church always insists that the person go through a period of preparation. So even if you're going to assist at the exorcism, you have to spend a period of prayer and fasting. You have to make a very good confession before you go in. You receive communion. There's actually a story that took place in St. Louis again at Alexian Brothers Hospital. Whenever somebody who was in the state of grace walked into the room, the boy would shriek and go through convulsions and everything. One day a doctor walked in the room and the boy was entirely silent. And everyone kind of looked at him, so he rushed out of the room, came back after lunch and walked in the room, and the devil went berserk. So again, he obviously went to confession on his lunch break. That's one of those situations of a holy thing being brought in without the knowledge of the possessed person. So what are the causes of possession? How do people become possessed? Most commonly, it's a punishment for sin. And there's a list here I have of the sins that most often lead to possession. Infidelity is one. Apostasy. Abuse of the Blessed Sacrament. Blasphemy. Pride. Extreme sexual perversion. Aleister Crowley is a good example of this. I don't know if you know of him. He's a famous Satanist from the early 1900s, late 1800s. And he called upon the devil through tremendous perversion. Homosexuality, obviously, would be another example of this. Envy, avarice, persecution of Catholics, contempt for God and holy things, and last, curses or pacts with the devil. When people enter into a type of pact for the devil, they're trying to get something. Those are the most common ways that a person is possessed, which is punishment for sin. Second is the request of the victim to be possessed. People will actually do that. They'll offer themselves as a victim of possession. Perfect example of this, Alice Cooper, I'm sure you're all familiar with him. Very satanic rock star. In one of his concerts, he announced to the crowd, everyone that was there, he said, look, he said, I've become popular. I've gained my position of fame because I sold my soul to the devil. If any of you want to be famous in this concert hall, I have sign-up sheets, sign it up. And by that signature, you will be giving your soul to the devil. So many people signed up, they ran out of paper to write it. That's requesting the devil to enter into them. The case in Brazil I told you about that I heard the tapes. That boy was very active on satanic websites. And he got to a website, and it had a form you'd fill out to be possessed. He filled it out and clicked, I want to be possessed. Now, obviously, the internet doesn't possess you, but it was his act of will, offering himself as a victim to the devil. Another cause of possession, and this is very, very, very rare, is God will use possession sometimes for the purification of innocent souls. There are several cases of this. I don't want to go into it too deeply, but there are times when even saints have been possessed for short periods of time, sometimes for long periods of time. Examples of that, I can give you a list of different people if you want to look into it afterwards. Father Serin, he was a priest in the 1600s that performed an exorcism on a whole convent of nuns that was possessed. The devil ended up entering into him. Antoine Gay is another case. Annelise Michel was another case. Her case was interesting because exorcisms were never successful with her, and she stopped the exorcisms at a certain point because she said I feel I'm a chosen victim to make belief in the devil more widely accepted in our days. Very rare again, but it does happen. So, moving on, you have to ask a question, is that what the devil really wants, is just to possess people? Certainly not. What the devil wants more than anything else is to be freely chosen over God. He wants to be accepted. He wants human beings to have the choice. Here's God and here's the devil. He wants them to choose the devil. Now, many things in our society tend exactly towards this. And that's what I want to speak about as the last part here. First of all, you have explicitly. I divided this into three ways: explicit, semi-explicit, and what did I put here? Implicit, obviously. So explicitly, what are the factors in our society of people that explicitly are looking for giving themselves to the devil, or explicitly choosing the devil over God? One of them is satanic masses. I don't know if you're all familiar with the Black Mass that was just canceled in Harvard. Harvard University was going to host a Black Mass. There's another one that's about to take place, I think it's in New Hampshire. Oklahoma, thank you, Oklahoma. They're building a monument to the devil, and they're going to have a satanic mass there on public property. Another one is ritualistic murders. You all know Helter Skelter, things like that. Even worse than that, in our days, these things are becoming increasingly common. Just recently, apparently there's a horror story figure that's very rampant on the internet. And it's a figure called Skinny Man. Has anyone heard of this before? Apparently there are these stories, these horror stories that circulate on the internet, and one of these figures is called Skinny Man. 3 murders have been done in honor of this fictitious character, Skinny Man. The most shocking was performed by 2 12-year-old girls against another 12-year-old girl. They killed one of their friends. Actually, the girl had lived, but she was stabbed 19 times by these two 12-year-olds. And what did the 12-year-olds say? They said that we perform this murder to prove that Skinny Man exists and to prove ourselves worthy of him. That's a satanic murder. This character, obviously, is just taking the place of the devil. Another explicit acceptance of Satan over God is the satanic rock music that we've spoken about already. I mentioned Alice Cooper. He's one of many. People going to these concerts would make the sign of the devil. They're freely choosing the devil over God. So that's the explicit accepting of the devil in our world. What are the semi-explicit ways? Semi-explicit. Semi-explicit would be, for example, the desire for ugliness over beauty. Why do I say that that's a semi-explicit choosing of the devil over God? Because St. Thomas Aquinas, when he defined God, how did he define God? He said God is goodness, truth, and beauty. Goodness, truth, and beauty. So whenever you choose evil, falsehood, or ugliness, you're choosing the devil over God. Consider this also. The Bible tells us that God is not found in agitation. Non in commotione domine. Whenever people seek to be agitated, when they like that frenzy of agitation over a calm and reflected state, semi-explicitly they're choosing the devil over God. Chaos. The desire for chaos. God is perfect order. The devil wants the opposite of that. He wants chaos. In order to demonstrate some of this, I want to play for you a tape. I hope I'm able to download this. My internet connection has been really bad. But I consider these heavy metal rock bands are a perfect example of choosing chaos, ugliness, disorder over goodness, regardless of what the lyrics say. So just listen to this for a second, and I want you to think, does this invite God into a soul, or does it invite the devil into a soul? Why did I play that one for you? Remember I said it doesn't matter what the lyrics say. It matters much more the frenzy that it puts your soul into. I played you this one. That's a Christian band. It's called Christian metal music. That song is written in honor of God. You think that invites God into people's souls? Certainly not. Certainly not. There's another short clip I want to play for you. I don't think it's going to download. There's a 6-year-old girl who's going around singing that kind of music now, screaming into the microphone and everything. I consider that a semi-explicit acceptance of the devil over God. I mean, you compare that with the songs that are contemplative, that are uplifting. There's so many beautiful musics we can listen to. That's the opposite of that. Another thing I want to call your attention to is so many children's toys these days are monstrous. They're horrendous. Little boys playing with monsters. You know, it used to be boys would play with toy soldiers, with crusaders, with ships. They have literally horrific monsters that are given out for people to play with. It's getting the child to accept ugliness over goodness. What about the fascination with zombies in our day? I mean, is it healthy for a kid to be playing with a toy that's a rotting corpse? It's very shocking. One of our Fatima visits, as you all know, we publish a children's book on Fatima called Jacinta Story. One of our custodians was on a visit showing the Jacinta story to the children of a family, and they were interested. And the mother came by and she said, no, I don't want my children to see that. And he said, why? He said, because it talks about the vision of hell in that. He said, okay, you want to shelter your children, that's fine. 2 minutes later, a woman came in with a catalog for zombie dolls and showed it to the lady. And she brought her kids over to see it and said, aren't these cute? Wouldn't you all like to play with some of these? So the child can't see the way Our Lady presents hell to 3 children, but it's all right for them to play with rotting corpses. It's crazy. This is the acceptance of the devil. I want to use the semi-implicit also. I want to talk a little bit about the story, the Disney movie that's out called Maleficent. Has anyone heard of that? Maleficent. I want to read for you part of a movie review about this. This is an author, and he talks about how something really bothered him about the movie Maleficent. And in order to explain that, he gives just a short recap of the plot line. Now listen to this and see if this sounds familiar to you. The old story you've heard of Sleeping Beauty and an evil witch is not really as it appears. For that witch actually began as a lovely girl named Doer of Evil, the greatest and most beautiful of the heavenly beings, until the evil king in this story stripped her of her wings and cast her to the earth. Does that sound familiar at all? Continues. Consumed by vengeance over this betrayal, she installs herself as a pagan queen over the supernatural world, aided by her servants Balthazar and Diablo. In this version of the tale, her life aim is to get vengeance upon the king by cursing and destroying his only child. Does that sound familiar to you all? It's a retelling of the story of Genesis, the fall of the angels, and the hero is the devil. That's a semi-explicit acceptance of the devil. Let's move on into the implicit acceptances of the devil. Again, ugliness, the choosing of ugliness over beauty. I would include many forms of modern art, modern architecture. It's making things ugly for the sake of ugliness. Another thing that's implicit is a very widespread desire within our society to give control of ourselves to an outside force. That's the same mechanism as possession. Giving your control of yourself to something else. I would include in this drugs and alcohol abuse. What is the person seeking? He's seeking to give an outside force control over himself. It's giving his sovereignty over to something else. The frenzy that takes place at certain sporting events. They talk about electricity in the air. You give yourself to that frenzy. Many people at sporting events, especially in Latin America, soccer matches, induced by that frenzy, they stampede people to death. They murder people on the fields. It's that giving of sovereignty over to the frenzy. Mob mentality, all of these ideas of electricity in the air, all of those things. When you're giving yourself to that, once again, you're giving up sovereignty of yourself to an outside force, which is the same mechanism as possession. So, just to finish off here, I don't want to stop on such a bad note. I want to talk about the means we have to fight against this influence of the devil. The first means is very, very simple. It also comes from the scripture. Prayer and fasting. In St. Matthew's Gospel, our Lord said this. He was talking about, I'll just read you the passage. This comes from St. Matthew chapter 7, verses 18 and 20. Then came the disciples of Jesus secretly and said, "Why could we not cast him out?" Because they had had trouble casting the devil out of someone. Jesus said to them, "Because of your unbelief. For amen, I say to you, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you shall say to this mountain, remove yourself from hence, and it shall remove itself, and nothing shall be impossible to you. But this kind of devil is not cast out, but by prayer and fasting." And these are spiritual things we're talking about. We need to employ spiritual forces. So prayer, especially the rosary, especially the St. Michael prayer. Fasting. Fasting has always been suggested by the church. And I would include also any kind of sacrifice that you do in this as a type of fasting. Many people don't understand really what it means to sacrifice. They think they have to go out and do these tremendous acts of penance and whatnot. That's not necessary. As you know, in the Fatima message, Our Lady asked for sacrifice many, many times. And people keep coming to Lucy and saying, what does Our Lady mean when she tells us to sacrifice? And Our Lady said something very interesting. She said, tell the people, if they would only embrace lovingly the suffering that God is sending them, that is sacrifice enough. We don't tend to do that. Whenever we have a sacrifice, even if we have a headache, oh, why me? We have trouble at work, why me? No, Our Lady's asking us to embrace that and to accept it. And it doesn't mean it's always going to be easy to accept. If you get cancer, that's a suffering that God sends you. So, that is what fights the devil. That's one. The second thing I want to mention is the sacraments, especially confession and communion. Very strong against the influence of the devil. Third, sacramentals that the church gives us. Holy water. Carry holy water with you and use it a lot. The St. Benedict's medal. It's the most exorcistic medal in the church. The miraculous medal. Relics. All of these things fight the influence of the devil. Fourth thing I would mention is recognize the devil's presence and recognize that he's acting. You see, the devil always wants to keep himself hidden. He doesn't want his presence known. That takes away some of his means of action. That's why the first element of an exorcism of the church is always to make the devil show himself. If you see clearly the action of the devil, that serves to disarm him. The fifth thing is, I'm going to make recourse to a very general rule throughout creation. And that is, like things are attracted to each other. If we make ourselves more like God, it attracts God to us. So, with that in mind, what attracts the angels to us? Those things that are most closely in line with what the angels are. Those things that are clean, in order. Those things that are beautiful. Think of the pictures of the Gothic cathedrals, the beautiful churches. Those are not conducive for the devil to enter because they're very dissimilar to the devil. They're magnets for angels and they expel the devils. So, included in this notion of order, I think the most important thing is to have an ordered mind that's dominated by your intellect. Don't give way to your sentiments, your feelings, your passions. Those are the things that the devil has more control over. Giving into your emotions. If you have a well-ordered mind that's dominated by your mind, by logic, that prohibits the devil from entering. And again, like I said, the devil is attracted to those things that are most like him. Filth, disorder, chaos. Put your lives in order. I would say even put your houses in order. It sounds kind of silly, but has anyone here ever cleaned a room that was dirty? and you go in afterwards and you feel calmer in there, you feel better in there. There's a natural side to that, but I'm sorry, there's something of the angelic and the demonic. Cleanliness expels the devil, filth attracts him. So that's just a little bit of the different ways we can fight against that. I realize that this is a very broad topic, and I didn't get to go into details with anything. I'd be happy to talk more about it afterwards. But before we finish, does anyone have any questions or comments? Yes, Rick. Yeah. Such influence. It's very interesting. Rick, I don't know if everyone heard him. You mentioned that. What about figures like Hitler and possession? I mean, how was it possible that this one man was able to have such a tremendous influence over people when he was totally evil? There actually, you're probably aware of this, there are signs that Hitler did have the help of devils in what he was doing. There's a famous case, and this is historic, you can read about it. One of the cities that Hitler was going to give a speech in, a priest hid under the stage and prayed the prayers of exorcism during the speech. Hitler became tongue-tied, didn't finish his speech, left and said he never wanted to go back to that city again. I mean, it's history. So there definitely is. And we might see a certain influence closer to home, too, with leaders as well. I'll leave it at that. Does anyone else have any? Yes, Ray.
How about Our Lady of Scripture in Genesis that will crush her head?
Absolutely. Our Lady is the terror of the devils. And she was the one that was given the mission in Genesis to crush the head of the devil. And it's very beautiful because many theologians say that the devil actually fears Our Lady more than he fears God. Why? Because to be defeated by God doesn't crush his pride. Everyone's defeated by God. But to be defeated by a creature of God is much more humiliating for him. And in his pride, he fears humiliation more than anything else. So many theologians say that the devil actually fears Our Lady more than God because of that. So it's very beautiful. God created Our Lady as a very powerful force against the devil. And that's why I say one of the best prayers you can say to counteract the influence of the devil is the rosary, Our Lady's rosary. I mean, that is the weapon she gave us against the powers of evil. Anyone else have anything? Okay, if not, maybe we can go on to the wonderful meal we have out there. Hopefully it's not too cold after all this. So we'll just finish here with the prayers before meals, and please help yourselves to the food, and we'll have a chance to talk if anyone has any other questions or comments. So if everyone will stand up, we'll pray for the in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.